The courtroom in the small American town of Briarwood carried a strange stillness that morning, the kind that pressed against the chest and made even breathing feel too loud. Sunlight streamed through tall, narrow windows, cutting long golden lines across the polished wooden floor. Dust floated lazily in the air, visible only because the room had gone so quiet. Every bench was occupied. Every seat carried a story, though most people believed only one story mattered: the case before the judge. At the front of the room, Judge Harold Whitman adjusted his glasses and scanned the courtroom with tired eyes. He had presided over cases for nearly 3 decades. He had seen anger, lies, grief, and desperation. Nothing about this case had prepared him for what was coming. To him, this was another file, another set of arguments, another decision to be weighed and recorded. To the right of the witness stand lay Rex. Rex was a German shepherd, 7 years old, with a coat the color of autumn leaves and eyes that missed nothing. He lay perfectly still beside his handler, Officer Daniel Moore, his body disciplined into silence. His leash rested loosely in Moore's hand, more ceremonial than necessary. Rex didn't need restraint. He was trained to wait, trained to observe, trained to respond only when needed. Most people in the room barely noticed him. They noticed the defendant, a young man with nervous hands and a stiff jaw. They noticed the attorneys, confident in tailored suits. They noticed the jury, alert but already tired. They noticed the uniformed officers standing along the walls. No one noticed the child. 3-year-old Lily sat on the back bench, her feet swinging inches above the floor. She was small for her age, with soft brown curls that refused to stay tied and eyes far too serious for someone so young. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, its fur matted and one ear hanging lower than the other. The rabbit had been with her through nights she didn't remember clearly but felt deeply. Lily didn't understand why she was there. She didn't know what a courtroom was or why people spoke in voices that sounded sharp and heavy. She didn't know what words like testimony or evidence meant. She only knew that adults had been tense since morning, that no one smiled, and that something about this place made her stomach feel tight. She leaned against the woman beside her, her aunt, Sarah, who gently squeezed her hand without looking down. Sarah's attention was fixed on the front of the room, her jaw clenched, her shoulders stiff. She had promised Lily it would be quick. She had been wrong. As the prosecutor stood and began speaking, Lily's gaze wandered. Her eyes followed the sound of shoes scraping against the floor. They followed the echo of voices bouncing off wooden walls. They followed the slow movement of the ceiling fan overhead. She yawned quietly, rubbing her face against the rabbit's soft head. Then she saw the dog. At first, it was just a shape, a large, still shape that didn't fidget like the people did. Her eyes lingered on Rex longer than anything else in the room. Something about him pulled her attention like a magnet. Rex hadn't moved since entering the courtroom. His ears lay relaxed, his breathing steady. But when Lily's gaze settled on him, his ears twitched almost imperceptibly. A signal so subtle only someone who knew him well would have noticed. Officer Moore felt it before he saw it. Years of working with Rex had tuned him to the dog's smallest shifts. Moore glanced down briefly. Rex's eyes were open now, focused, not on the front of the room but angled slightly toward the back. Toward Lily. Moore frowned, then looked away. Dogs notice things. That was their job. He dismissed the thought and returned his attention to the proceedings. The prosecutor's voice filled the room, steady and practiced. He described a late-night operation, a search, a suspect apprehended with the help of a highly trained police K-9. He spoke of reliability, discipline, and protocol. As Rex's name was mentioned, a few jurors glanced at the dog. Rex didn't move. He didn't need to. His reputation spoke for him. Lily's grip tightened on her rabbit. The words didn't mean anything to her, but the sound of Rex's name sent a strange ripple through her chest. Her breathing grew shallow. Her legs stopped swinging. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the dog. A flicker of memory stirred, not clear, not complete, just pieces. Bright flashing lights that hurt her eyes, loud voices that made her ears ring, cold air against her skin, and barking, not angry, urgent. Rex lifted his head fully now. Officer Moore felt the shift instantly. Rex's posture had changed from passive to alert. His muscles were tense, his gaze fixed. Moore followed the line of sight. That's when he saw the child. Just a little girl at the back of the courtroom, staring at Rex as if the rest of the world had faded away. Moore's stomach tightened for reasons he couldn't explain. Rex's ears stood tall, his eyes softened but his focus sharpened. This wasn't aggression. This wasn't anxiety. This was recognition. Lily felt tears prick at her eyes, though she didn't know why. She wasn't scared of the dog. She was scared of what the dog reminded her of. The feeling was too big for her body, too heavy for her words. She shifted on the bench, restless now. Sarah leaned down. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just sit tight." Lily nodded, but didn't look away from Rex. The courtroom droned on, oblivious. Legal arguments continued. Papers were passed. Notes were taken. Everyone believed they were in control of the narrative. Everyone except the dog and the child. Rex let out a slow breath through his nose. His tail twitched once against the floor. Officer Moore tightened his grip on the leash, unease creeping into his chest. Rex had worked dozens of cases. He had testified in court before, lying quietly, professionally, without incident. This was different. This wasn't training. This was instinct. Lily's small fingers trembled around the rabbit's ear. She felt something building inside her, an urge she didn't understand but couldn't ignore. Her eyes flicked briefly to her aunt, then back to Rex. The dog's gaze never left her. Somewhere deep in Lily's memory, a moment waited to be acknowledged, a truth without language, a moment that had been seen by eyes that never forgot. And in that courtroom, long before anyone realized it, the story they thought they were telling had already begun to fall apart. The prosecutor's voice carried confidence, the kind built on preparation and certainty. He paced slowly before the jury, hands clasped behind his back, explaining the events of a night that had already been labeled clear-cut by nearly everyone involved. 3 months earlier, officers had responded to a reported burglary on the edge of Briarwood. A suspect had fled the scene on foot, disappearing into a maze of trees and abandoned buildings. That was when Rex had been deployed. According to the official report, the dog tracked the suspect swiftly, leading officers to an arrest within minutes. Evidence was recovered. The case, on paper, was solid. As the prosecutor spoke, jurors nodded. Some scribbled notes. Others leaned back, satisfied. They trusted dogs like Rex. They trusted procedures. They trusted that mistakes were rare and small. Rex lay at Officer Moore's side, unmoving, as if carved from stone. His training demanded stillness, and he delivered it flawlessly. But inside, his senses were alive. Sounds layered over one another, the scratch of pens, the shuffle of shoes, the slow breathing of dozens of people. And beneath it all, one familiar presence pulsed softly at the back of the room. The child. Lily shifted again, her legs now pulled up onto the bench. She rested her chin on her knees, eyes never leaving Rex. Her aunt brushed a hand through Lily's curls absent-mindedly, her attention fixed forward. Sarah had rehearsed this day in her mind many times. She believed they were here to put a painful chapter behind them. She had no idea they were about to reopen it. As the defense attorney rose, his tone was calm but cautious. He didn't deny the chase. He didn't deny Rex's involvement. Instead, he questioned timing, procedure, whether evidence had been properly documented. It was the kind of argument meant to plant doubt, not create drama. No one expected drama. Lily's breathing grew uneven. Her small chest rose and fell too quickly. She squeezed her rabbit tighter, pressing its soft fabric against her cheek. The courtroom began to feel too big, too loud. Words blended together, meaningless and sharp. Then Rex moved. It was slight, a shift of weight, a tightening of muscle, but Officer Moore felt it immediately. Rex's tail stilled. His ears angled sharply backward, then forward again. He was listening to something that wasn't being said. Moore glanced down, his jaw tightening. "Easy," he whispered under his breath, though Rex hadn't done anything wrong. Rex's gaze flicked again toward Lily. The connection snapped into focus for him now. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't distraction. Rex recognized her. Recognition for a working dog was not sentimental. It was precise. It meant memory. It meant unfinished business. Lily's mind drifted backward, pulled by sensation rather than thought. She remembered being carried quickly, arms tight around her, the smell of sweat and fear. She remembered being set down roughly behind something hard and cold. She remembered crying until her throat hurt. And she remembered the dog. Not as a threat, but as a presence. A shape moving through darkness, eyes glowing softly in the night. A bark that didn't scare her but made her feel seen. Her lips parted slightly. No sound came out. The defense attorney gestured toward a diagram of the search area displayed on a screen. "According to reports," he said, "the K-9 alerted near this structure, but officers redirected the search." Officer Moore felt his pulse spike. That detail had bothered him from the beginning. Rex had alerted near an old storage shed behind the abandoned buildings. Moore had trusted his partner completely. But orders came through the radio, focus shifted, the suspect spotted elsewhere. The alert was logged, then dismissed as inconclusive. Rex hadn't been wrong. He never was. Lily's foot tapped anxiously against the bench. Her aunt leaned closer. "SHH," Sarah whispered gently, "almost done." Lily shook her head slightly, tears welling now. She didn't know why her body felt like it was buzzing, why her heart beat so fast. She only knew the dog was important, and no one was listening. Rex's breathing deepened. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, not a bark, but a warning to himself. "Stay, watch." Officer Moore straightened, his attention no longer on the lawyers. His eyes followed Rex's gaze to the back bench. The child was shaking. Moore's throat went dry. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. Years in law enforcement had taught him to respect patterns, especially when they repeated themselves across species. The judge called for a brief recess. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversation as people stood and stretched. Jurors whispered. Lawyers huddled. Rex remained seated, but his eyes never left Lily. Sarah noticed the dog's attention then. She pulled Lily closer, uneasy. "Why is the dog staring?" she murmured. Lily swallowed hard. "He knows," she whispered back. Sarah stiffened. "Knows what, sweetheart?" Lily didn't answer. She couldn't. Words weren't enough. Officer Moore approached slowly during the break, careful not to alarm anyone. He crouched slightly to Lily's level, keeping a respectful distance. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to be scared." Lily looked at him, then at Rex. Rex lowered his head slightly, eyes gentle. "He saw," Lily said again, barely louder than a breath. Moore felt something shift inside his chest, heavy and undeniable. The bailiff announced the end of recess. Everyone returned to their seats. Order was restored. But control was gone. The prosecutor resumed, unaware that the foundation beneath his case was cracking. The defense attorney sensed it, though he couldn't yet name it. The judge watched more closely now, his experience warning him when something didn't fit. And at the back of the room, a 3-year-old girl sat trembling, holding a truth too large for her small hands. Rex lay back down beside his handler, posture rigid, mind alert. He had tracked this truth once before, in darkness and chaos. This time he would not let it be ignored. When the courtroom settled back into silence after the recess, something had changed. The stillness was no longer passive. It felt watchful, like the room itself was waiting. Judge Whitman adjusted his posture, eyes lingering longer than usual on the back benches. He had noticed the interaction during the break, the officer kneeling, the child's pale face, the dog's unwavering attention. Decades on the bench had taught him that truth often arrived quietly before it exploded. Lily sat pressed against her aunt, shoulders tight. Her small body trembled despite the warmth of the room. She wasn't cold. She was overwhelmed. The feeling inside her chest had grown heavier, like a stone sinking deeper with every passing minute. Rex lay beside Officer Moore, but rest had left him. His muscles stayed coiled beneath his fur, ready. His ears tracked every sound, but his focus never drifted far from Lily. He remembered her scent. Fear mixed with something else, relief. He had found her once. Officer Moore tried to focus on the proceedings, but his mind kept replaying that night. Rain-soaked ground, flashing red and blue lights. Rex pulling hard on the leash, nose low, tail stiff. The alert near the shed, Moore had trusted it, command hadn't. At the time, he told himself it didn't matter. The suspect had been caught. The report was written. Case closed. But dogs didn't forget dismissed truths. The prosecutor resumed questioning a witness, another officer involved in the arrest. His testimony followed the report closely, too closely. Moore felt his jaw tighten. He knew how reports could be shaped, how details faded when they were inconvenient. Lily's breathing quickened as voices rose and fell. The witness described the search area, the shed, the alley, the abandoned buildings. Her fingers curled into her rabbit again. Her mind slipped sideways, not backward in clear images, but inward into sensation. Cold metal beneath her palms. Her cheek pressed against rough concrete. A voice shouting somewhere far away. She remembered being told to stay quiet. She remembered being scared, not of the dark, but of being alone. And then movement. Heavy pause, controlled, careful. She remembered warm breath near her face, a nose brushing her arm, a bark that sounded different from the angry noises before, not loud, not sharp. Protective. Her throat tightened. Lily shifted, letting out a small sound. Sarah hushed her gently, stroking her hair. Almost done, she whispered again, though uncertainty had crept into her voice. Rex's head snapped up. The sound Lily made, soft, involuntary, was the same sound she had made that night, a whimper she hadn't meant to release. Recognition pulsed through Rex's body. Officer Moore saw it instantly. Rex's posture changed again, more pronounced this time. His front paws pressed into the floor, his tail lifted slightly. He was no longer just observing. He was responding. Moore swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him, the same instincts that had saved lives in dark alleys and tense standoffs. He raised his hand slightly. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady but tight. Judge Whitman looked up. "Yes, officer. I believe my K9 is reacting to something relevant." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor frowned. "With respect, Your Honor, the dog has already." Judge Whitman raised a hand. "I'll decide what's relevant." His eyes moved to Rex, then to Lily. "Officer," the judge said slowly, "explain." Moore stood, every eye in the room turned toward him. "Rex alerted during the original search," Moore said, "near a shed behind the abandoned structures. That alert was logged but deprioritized." The defense attorney's head snapped up. "That location was never searched," Moore continued. "Rex is reacting now in the same way he did that night." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "Objection, speculation." "Overruled," the judge said quietly. Lily felt the attention like heat on her skin. She shrank back, heart racing. She didn't want to be seen. She only wanted the feeling to stop. Rex whined softly. The sound pulled Lily forward again, like a thread tightening between them. She slid off the bench slowly this time, not sudden, not loud. The courtroom seemed to lean inward as she stepped into the aisle. Sarah reached for her, startled. "Lily." "It's okay," Lily said, surprising even herself. She looked at Rex. "He found me," she whispered. The room went still. Judge Whitman's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering against the desk. Officer Moore felt his knees weaken. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, did the child say?" "She did," the judge replied, his voice measured but intense. "And we are going to listen." Lily pointed, not accusing, not dramatic, just honest. "He found me," she said again. "I was scared. He stayed." Rex barked once, sharp and clear. "Not aggressive." "Confirming." The sound echoed through the courtroom like a verdict. Sarah covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. "Lily, sweetheart, what are you talking about?" Lily frowned, confused by the emotion around her. "The bad place," she said. "He came, then the lights came." The prosecutor sat slowly, color draining from his face. Judge Whitman leaned forward. "Officer Moore," he said, voice low, "why wasn't that location searched?" Moore clenched his jaw. "Orders changed, Your Honor." Silence followed, heavy, damning. The defense attorney was already moving. "Your Honor, I request an immediate review of all K-9 logs and dispatch recordings from the night in question." "So ordered," the judge said without hesitation. The courtroom buzzed now, not with confusion but with realization. Rex sat calmly again, his duty fulfilled once more. His eyes softened as Lily looked at him, a small smile breaking through her fear. She waved. Rex wagged his tail once. The judge called for a recess, his voice firm. As people stood, whispers filled the air, questions, doubts, regret. A case once considered routine now stood on the edge of collapse. Officer Moore knelt beside Rex, resting a hand on his back. "Good boy," he murmured, emotion thick in his throat. At the back of the room, Lily leaned into her aunt, exhausted but lighter, as if a weight she didn't understand had finally been set down. The truth had been there all along. It just needed the right voices to bring it back into the light. The recess did nothing to calm the courtroom. If anything, it made the tension sharper. People returned to their seats more slowly this time, whispers trailing behind them like shadows. Jurors avoided eye contact with one another. The prosecutor stared down at his notes as if they might rearrange themselves into something safer. The defense attorney moved with renewed purpose, already assembling questions in his mind. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. The seriousness of what had just happened pressed down on every breath. Judge Whitman took his seat again, his face stern in a way that signaled this was no longer an ordinary proceeding. At the back of the room, Lily sat on her aunt's lap now, her small body limp with exhaustion. The emotional surge that had pushed her forward moments earlier had faded, leaving behind confusion and fatigue. She sucked quietly on her thumb, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. She didn't understand why adults were staring at her. She didn't understand why her aunt's heart was pounding so hard that Lily could feel it through her chest. She only knew the dog had done something good. Rex sat beside Officer Moore, posture alert but calm. His breathing had steadied. The task that had unsettled him, unfinished, unresolved, now felt acknowledged. He had responded. He had communicated in the only way he knew how. Whether the humans listened now was out of his control. Officer Moore felt very much aware of every eye in the room. He had spent years testifying in court, confident in facts and procedure. But this was different. This wasn't about arrest protocols or training certifications. This was about a moment that should have mattered and hadn't. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. "We are no longer proceeding as originally planned," he said firmly. "The court has an obligation to examine new information when it arises, no matter the source." His eyes flicked briefly toward Lily, then back to the attorneys. "Officer Moore," the judge continued, "you will remain available for questioning. Counsel, you may proceed carefully. The defense attorney stood immediately. Officer Moore, he said, voice controlled but sharp, let's revisit the night of the arrest, specifically the K9 alert near the shed. Moore straightened. Yes, sir. Did your dog alert clearly? Yes. Did you communicate that alert to command? Yes. And was that location searched? Moore paused, the silence stretched. No, he said finally. The word echoed louder than it should have. The prosecutor rose quickly. Objection, this line of questioning is misleading. The suspect was apprehended elsewhere shortly after. Judge Whitman raised a hand. Sit down. The prosecutor hesitated, then complied. The defense attorney nodded once. Officer Moore, do you have any reason to believe that alert was related to something or someone other than the suspect? Moore's gaze flicked, just for a second, to Lily. Yes, he said quietly, I do now. A ripple moved through the room. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Her arms tightened around Lily instinctively, protective and shaking. What do you mean by that? The defense attorney pressed. I believe my dog located the child that night, Moore said, or at least confirmed her presence. Gasps filled the courtroom. Judge Whitman leaned forward slowly. Officer, he said, voice low, are you stating that a minor may have been present at the scene of the crime? Yes, Your Honor. The prosecutor stood again, visibly rattled. This is highly irregular. It's highly concerning, the judge interrupted. Sit down. The room obeyed. Lily stirred, disturbed by the rising tension. She lifted her head and looked around, confused by the expressions she saw: shock, disbelief, guilt. Rex turned his head slightly to check on her. The judge addressed the room. I want absolute clarity. Was there any mention of a missing or endangered child in the original reports? Moore swallowed. No, Your Honor. Why not? Because no one knew, he answered. At least, no one connected the dots. The defense attorney moved closer. Officer Moore, describe your dog's behavior right now. Moore glanced down at Rex. Focused, calm, alert, the same state he enters when a track has meaning. Judge Whitman nodded slowly. Then this court will treat this information with the seriousness it deserves. He turned his attention to Sarah. Ma'am, he said gently, I know this is difficult, but I must ask, was your niece reported missing on the night of the incident? Sarah's breath caught. She shook her head. No, she whispered. She wasn't missing, she was taken. The word hit like a blow. Lily whimpered softly, sensing the shift in her aunt's voice. Judge Whitman closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them with renewed intensity. Taken by whom? Sarah hesitated, then looked at Lily. She doesn't know his name, Sarah said, but she was found hours later, shaken and confused. We thought she'd wandered. We didn't want to believe anything worse. The courtroom sat frozen. The prosecutor's face had gone pale. The defense attorney exhaled slowly, absorbing the implications. Judge Whitman's voice hardened. This court is suspending all current proceedings. I am ordering an immediate investigation into the handling of evidence, K9 alerts, and potential child endangerment connected to this case. He struck the gavel once. The sound was final. People erupted into motion, lawyers speaking urgently, officers stepping into action, reporters scribbling notes. The calm order of the courtroom shattered into controlled chaos. Rex stood again, tail low but steady, eyes tracking Lily as she was guided toward the aisle. Officer Moore knelt beside him, resting a hand against his shoulder. You did good, he whispered. You never stopped telling the truth. Lily looked back at Rex as she passed. Thank you, she said softly. Rex wagged his tail. Judge Whitman watched the child leave the room, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He had spent his life believing truth emerged through careful questioning and evidence. Today, it had come from a child who barely understood what truth was, and a dog who never forgot it. As the courtroom slowly emptied, one thing was clear. This case was no longer about guilt or innocence alone. It was about what happens when truth is ignored, and what it costs when it finally demands to be heard. The courthouse no longer felt like a place of order. It felt like a place of reckoning. Long after Judge Whitman suspended the proceedings, the building remained alive with motion. Officers moved quickly through hallways. Lawyers whispered urgently into phones. Court staff carried boxes of files that had not been touched in months. What had begun as a routine case was now unfolding into something far larger and far more dangerous to ignore. In a quiet conference room down the hall, Officer Daniel Moore sat with Rex at his side. Rex lay alert but calm, head resting on his paws, eyes following every movement. Moore rubbed his temples slowly, exhaustion and guilt twisting together in his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about that night. He had trusted Rex, he always had, but when command redirected the search, he obeyed. That was the job: follow orders, trust the system. Now he wondered how many times the system had failed simply because no one wanted to slow down and listen. Across the room, two internal investigators spread out documents on the table: dispatch logs, body cam footage, K9 tracking data. One of them paused, tapping a page with his finger. "This alert," he said, "it's clear. The dog indicated presence, not a false hit." The other investigator nodded grimly, and it was brushed aside. Moore swallowed hard. Meanwhile, in another room, Sarah sat holding Lily on her lap. Lily had fallen asleep, her small body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of the day. Her stuffed rabbit lay pressed against her chest, rising and falling with each quiet breath. Sarah watched her niece's face, peaceful now, and felt her heart break all over again. She remembered the night Lily had been found wandering near the edge of town, dirty, crying, unable to explain where she had been. Everyone had assumed she'd wandered off. Sarah had wanted to believe that. It was easier than imagining something worse. Now she wondered what Lily had endured while no one was looking. A knock sounded at the door. Judge Whitman entered quietly, his expression gentler than it had been in the courtroom. "May I sit?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "I want you to know," the judge said softly, "that whatever happens next, this court will ensure the truth is fully uncovered." Sarah's voice trembled. "She tried to tell us," she whispered. "She just didn't have the words." Judge Whitman nodded slowly. "Children rarely do." Back in the evidence review room, the investigators began replaying audio from the original dispatch call. Rex's bark cut sharply through the recording, followed by Officer Moore's voice reporting the alert. Then came the command response, redirecting units elsewhere. The room fell silent. "That decision," one investigator said, "changed everything." They pulled body camera footage next. Grainy images flickered on the screen: darkness, flashlights, movement, Rex straining at the leash, Moore stopping near the shed. "Pause it there," Moore said suddenly. The image froze. In the background, barely visible, was movement near the shed's doorway. The investigator leaned closer. "Is that?" "A small figure," Moore said quietly. His chest tightened painfully. They enhanced the footage. The image clarified just enough to confirm it. "A child." Silence settled heavily over the room. In the hallway outside, the defense attorney paced slowly, phone pressed to his ear. His case had transformed overnight. What had once been about a flawed arrest was now about a buried truth. He ended the call and leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. Justice was no longer theoretical. It was urgent. The prosecutor, by contrast, sat alone in his office, staring at the ceiling. He had built his case on assumptions, on reports he had trusted without question. Now those same documents stared back at him like accusations. He knew what this meant. Not just for the case, but for his career. Back in the courtroom, now nearly empty, Rex lay on the cool floor, resting. His work was done for now, but his presence lingered like a witness who refused to leave. Officer Moore knelt beside him again, pressing his forehead briefly against Rex. "I should have pushed harder," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Rex lifted his head and licked Moore's cheek once, then settled again. No blame, no judgment, just loyalty. Hours later, Judge Whitman reconvened a limited session. The courtroom filled again, this time with a different energy, somber, alert, expectant. Judge Whitman took the bench. "This court has reviewed preliminary findings," he said. "They raise serious concerns regarding evidence handling, investigative decisions, and the welfare of a minor." He paused. "As a result, the defendant's conviction is vacated pending full review. Additionally, a separate investigation into potential child endangerment and procedural failure is hereby ordered." Gasps filled the room. Sarah clutched Lily closer as she stirred awake, blinking sleepily. Rex sat tall beside Officer Moore, ears forward. Judge Whitman's gaze swept the room. "Let me be clear. This is not about assigning blame prematurely. This is about correcting what should never have been overlooked." He struck the gavel once. The sound echoed, not as an ending but as a beginning. As people filed out, conversations buzzed quietly. Some were shocked, some were angry, some were relieved. Lily looked around, confused by the sudden movement. She spotted Rex across the room and smiled. "He's good," she said softly to Sarah. Sarah nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, "he is." Outside, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Reporters gathered. Officers spoke in hushed tones. The town of Briarwood would be talking about this day for years. But inside, something more important had happened. The truth, once ignored, had forced itself into the light. And it had done so through the quiet courage of a child and the unwavering instinct of a dog who refused to forget. The days that followed felt heavier than the courtroom itself. Briarwood woke up to news it never expected. Headlines spread fast. Case reopened after child statement. Police K-9 alert ignored. Court orders full review. People stopped one another on sidewalks, whispering in grocery stores, arguing quietly in diners. What had once been a routine criminal case had become a mirror held up to the entire town. Inside the police department, tension ran high. Internal affairs took over an entire wing of the building. Officers who had worked the original case were called in one by one. Reports were scrutinized line by line. Radio transmissions replayed again and again. Every decision was questioned. Officer Daniel Moore sat through his interview in silence, answering each question honestly. He didn't defend himself. He didn't shift blame. When asked why he hadn't pushed harder the night Rex alerted near the shed, he stared at the table for a long moment before answering. "Because I trusted the chain of command," he said, "and because I thought being wrong would slow everything down." The investigator nodded slowly. "And now?" Moore looked up. "Now I know being quiet costs more." Rex lay beside him during the interview, calm but attentive. The investigators had allowed it, recognizing the dog's central role. Every time Rex shifted, Moore felt steadier, as if the dog's presence anchored him to the truth. Meanwhile, the reopened investigation moved quickly. Technicians enhanced the body camera footage further. What had once been a shadow became clearer. A small figure crouched near the shed door, barely visible but unmistakable now. Timestamps showed officers were less than 30 yards away before being redirected. That discovery hit hard. Emails surfaced next. Communications that showed urgency to close the case, pressure from above, a desire to avoid complications. No one had intended to harm a child. But no one had slowed down enough to protect one either. At Sarah's home, Lily's routine returned slowly. She played with her toys, watched cartoons, asked simple questions. To an outsider, she looked like any other 3-year-old. But Sarah noticed the changes, the way Lily startled at loud noises, the way she sometimes hid behind furniture when overwhelmed. A child psychologist visited gently, using pictures and games. Lily struggled to explain, but certain things were clear. She hadn't wandered away. She had been carried. She had been told to stay quiet. And she remembered the dog. He stayed, Lily told the therapist, pressing a crayon hard against paper. He waited. The therapist wrote carefully in her notes, heart aching. Back at the courthouse, Judge Whitman reviewed reports late into the night. His desk overflowed with documents, investigative findings, legal motions, expert statements. He had presided over thousands of cases, but few weighed on him like this. He replayed Lily's small voice in his memory. He found me. Judges were trained to filter emotion, but Whitman understood now that ignoring it entirely was just another way of missing the truth. The defense attorney filed motions quickly, pushing not just for dismissal, but for accountability. The prosecution, under intense scrutiny, began cooperating fully. What had once been adversarial shifted into something closer to damage control. And above it all hovered a question no one wanted to ask out loud. How often had this happened before? One evening, Officer Moore returned to the abandoned area behind the sheds. The site was quiet now, cordoned off with tape. The smell of old metal and damp earth filled the air. He stood there alone with Rex, leash loose, letting the dog move freely. Rex went straight to the shed. He sat. Moore closed his eyes. I should have listened, he said softly. Rex pressed against his leg, solid and warm. Moore knelt, resting his hands on the dog's shoulders. You did your job, he whispered. I failed you. Rex licked his hand once, then sat patiently, eyes forward. No judgment, only loyalty. Days later, the court reconvened. The room filled again, this time with reporters lining the back walls. Cameras were prohibited, but notebooks were full. The air buzzed with anticipation. Sarah entered holding Lily's hand. Lily wore a simple blue dress, her rabbit tucked under her arm. She scanned the room until she spotted Rex. Her face lit up. He's here, she whispered. Rex wagged his tail. Judge Whitman took the bench, his expression resolute. This court has reviewed extensive evidence, he began. What has emerged is not a single failure, but a series of missed opportunities. He paused, letting the words settle. A trained K-9 alerted to a location containing a child in distress. That alert was logged, then disregarded. The consequences of that decision are now undeniable. The courtroom was silent. Judge Whitman continued. The defendant's case is dismissed in its entirety. Furthermore, this court refers the matter of procedural failure to the appropriate oversight bodies. A collective exhale swept through the room. Sarah squeezed Lily's hand, tears streaming down her face, not of fear now, but of release. Lily looked around, confused by the emotion, then smiled at Rex again. Rex sat tall, calm, unwavering. After the session ended, Officer Moore approached Sarah hesitantly. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have done more. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You're doing it now. She glanced down at Rex. He never stopped. Moore knelt to Lily's level. You were very brave, he said. Lily frowned slightly. I just pointed, she replied. Moore smiled sadly. Sometimes that's enough. Outside the courthouse, the sun hung low again, casting warm light across the steps. Reporters gathered statements. Officials spoke carefully. The town absorbed the weight of what it had learned. But for Lily, the day ended simply. She climbed into the car, hugging her rabbit, tired but lighter. As they pulled away, she waved out the window. Rex watched from the steps, tail wagging slowly. The truth had been buried under urgency and assumption. But instinct remembered. Innocence remembered. And once revealed, the truth refused to disappear again. The courtroom had changed, though the physical structure remained the same. The polished wooden floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but the energy inside had shifted from routine to something heavier, something real. What had once been a case of procedure versus evidence had transformed into a story about courage, memory, and the unexpected ways the smallest voices could be heard. Officer Moore entered quietly, Rex at his side. The dog's ears were alert, nose twitching as he scanned the room. Moore's mind replayed every detail of the night Lily had been found. He remembered her frightened eyes, her small body pressed against the ground, and he remembered Rex's alert, sharp, precise, and ignored. That night had haunted him quietly, but now the stakes were larger than guilt or innocence. It was about accountability. Sarah arrived shortly after, holding Lily's hand. Lily's fingers were intertwined with her rabbit, and though she appeared calm on the surface, her eyes darted nervously from one person to another. She didn't yet understand the full weight of what had happened. All she knew was that Rex was here, and he had helped her in a way no one else could. Judge Whitman took his seat, the gavel ready. The room held its collective breath. For once, the routine of legal formalities did not matter. What mattered was the truth that had been revealed through instinct and innocence. Today, the judge began, his voice firm yet solemn, this court acknowledges the role that each participant, human and animal, has played in uncovering facts previously overlooked. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. And while this court cannot undo the mistakes of the past, it will ensure accountability and justice moving forward. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence gone. He had built his case on reports and witness statements, but now the limitations of those documents were painfully clear. He realized that no amount of preparation could replace awareness, observation, or the courage to speak when the truth demanded it. The defense attorney, by contrast, stood tall, holding folders thick with new evidence, testimony, and procedural records. He moved with purpose, his focus unwavering. "Your Honor," he said, "we now understand that the original sequence of events failed to account for crucial K-9 alerts and overlooked the presence of a minor. We request a full reassessment and an official investigation into these procedural oversights." Judge Whitman nodded, "So ordered." Rex's head lifted slightly as the room hushed. The dog had done his job in the field. Now, in this room filled with humans debating responsibility, he waited calmly, eyes tracking Lily, ensuring she remained safe. Moore approached the bench slowly. "Your Honor," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I want to formally state that I failed to advocate for the K-9 alert that night. I trusted procedure over instinct. I let assumptions override evidence." He lowered his head, ashamed yet resolute. "I offer my full cooperation as the investigation proceeds." The judge's gaze softened, recognizing the courage it took to admit responsibility. "Acknowledgement of error is the first step toward remedy," he said. "And in this case, it may very well be the difference between correction and further harm." Sarah squeezed Lily's hand as her niece looked around, unsure what was happening. "It's okay, honey," Sarah whispered. "We're fixing it." Lily blinked, looking down at Rex. The dog's calm eyes met hers, a silent promise. She could feel it without words. He had protected her once, and he was still watching. That reassurance was all she needed to feel safe, even in a room that seemed larger and louder than ever. The judge called for a brief recess. As people filed out, murmuring among themselves, Moore stayed behind with Rex. He knelt, resting a hand against the dog's neck. "You never stopped telling the truth," he said softly. "I should have listened sooner." Rex pressed against him, steady, patient, as if to say, "It's okay now." Outside the courthouse, the sun had begun to dip, casting long shadows across the steps. The town was alive with whispers and speculation, reporters scribbling notes furiously, and citizens trying to process what had happened. Briarwood had seen many cases, but few like this. A child's small voice and a dog's silent vigilance had altered the course of events. Inside the courthouse, Sarah crouched beside Lily. "Do you remember the dog?" she asked gently. Lily nodded, holding her rabbit tightly. "He stayed with me," she said simply. "He didn't let go." Sarah hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He saved you," she whispered. "You were so brave." Lily looked at Rex again. "He found me," she said quietly. "Yes," Sarah said, stroking the dog's ears as Moore stood nearby. "He did." The courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, but the energy had shifted. Everyone seemed to move slower, more deliberately. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was an acknowledgement of lives altered and truths revealed. Judge Whitman addressed the room. "This case illustrates the importance of vigilance and listening, to evidence, to intuition, and to voices that might otherwise be overlooked." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A K-9 officer and a child have reminded us that truth often speaks quietly but insistently. Ignoring it has consequences. Listening to it has the power to save lives." Moore's hands clenched in his lap. He felt the weight of the words, the responsibility of what could have been prevented. Yet in the same moment he felt a quiet sense of relief. Rex had spoken. Lily had confirmed it. And now the human world was finally catching up. Sarah stood slowly, holding Lily's hand. "I just want her to be safe," she whispered to Moore, who nodded. "And now, thanks to both of you," she said, nodding at Rex and Moore, "she will be." The judge called the final statements before adjourning for the day. The courtroom was tense, but filled with a new kind of respect. Respect for the unexpected witnesses, for instincts followed, for courage displayed in the smallest forms. As people began to leave, the press and town citizens clustered outside, buzzing with speculation and admiration. Rex stayed with Moore, ever watchful, yet his posture relaxed. The dog's work had been vital, but now it was done, for today. Moore looked down at him. "We did the right thing," he said softly, "even if it took too long." Lily waved goodbye to Rex, smiling faintly through tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The dog tilted his head, letting her words sink in, then wagged his tail once. Sarah looked at Moore. "We'll make sure it never gets ignored again," she said, her voice firm. "Yes," Moore replied. "We'll make sure the truth is always heard." As the courthouse emptied, the sun dipped fully below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For Briarwood, the day had begun with tension and fear, and it ended with recognition, justice, and the extraordinary reminder that even the smallest voices and the silent instincts of a dog could shape the course of events. In that quiet moment, amidst fading light and murmuring townsfolk, Rex rested. His job was not yet done in the grand scheme of justice, but for this chapter he had been perfect. The child he had watched over, the truth he had highlighted, and the humans who finally began to see, it was enough. And somewhere deep in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, a lesson lingered. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it points. Sometimes it waits quietly. And sometimes it comes on four paws. The following morning, Briarwood awoke under a quiet sun, but the town's atmosphere was far from ordinary. Conversations rippled through cafes, schools, and markets, all revolving around the extraordinary courtroom events of the previous day. A 3-year-old child and a police dog had reminded everyone that truth didn't always arrive neatly in reports or statements. It often arrived quietly, persistently, and in unexpected forms. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was calmer, though still serious. Judge Whitman presided over a follow-up session, this time focused on implementing measures to prevent another oversight like the one that had endangered Lily. He addressed the courtroom with a measured but firm voice. "This court has seen that even the most routine procedures can fail if we neglect observation, instinct, or the smallest voices among us, he said. Today we reaffirm that every piece of evidence, every alert, and every witness, human or animal, matters. We are taking concrete steps to ensure K-9 alerts are always reviewed thoroughly, and the welfare of children in the community is never overlooked. Sarah held Lily's hand tightly as they listened. Lily, her small body still holding onto her stuffed rabbit, had a quiet confidence now. She glanced at Rex, sitting proudly at Officer Moore's side. That tail wag, subtle yet deliberate, told her everything she needed to know. He was watching, always alert, always protective. Moore adjusted Rex's leash, but the dog hardly moved. Years of service had taught him patience, focus, and discipline. Today, however, there was no tension in his body, only pride, a satisfaction that comes from protecting someone and finally being listened to. The defense attorney presented a detailed report of the investigation, showing how oversight had prevented critical evidence from being considered, and how the failure to act could have endangered lives. The prosecutor, visibly humbled, agreed to cooperate fully and implement new policies to prevent similar oversights in the future. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed, capturing photographs, notes, and statements. But Sarah and Lily moved carefully through the crowd, keeping Lily close. She was still a small child, and the media attention was overwhelming, yet the girl's experiences had given her a quiet resilience. "I'm proud of you, Lily," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Lily looked up at her aunt, eyes wide. "He stayed with me," she said simply, indicating Rex with a small nod. "Yes," Sarah replied, "he always will." Moore knelt beside Rex. "You did good, buddy," he murmured. "You never let go even when no one else listened." Rex leaned into him, warm and steady, a silent acknowledgement of their shared triumph. The town of Briarwood began to slowly process the events. The story of the child, the dog, and the court became a legend in its own right, a tale of courage, observation, and the extraordinary power of instinct. Local newspapers ran features highlighting the importance of police K-9 units, while community meetings focused on ensuring child safety in every corner of the town. For Sarah and Lily, life settled into a cautious rhythm. Counseling sessions helped Lily process the brief but impactful trauma, while Sarah worked tirelessly to ensure her niece felt safe and secure. Yet there were moments of joy and normalcy. Small walks in the park, quiet afternoons building block towers, and the comforting presence of Rex, who remained a constant guardian in their lives. One afternoon, as the sunlight poured through the windows of their living room, Lily sat on the floor coloring, her rabbit beside her. Rex lay nearby, one eye half closed, alert enough to watch but relaxed enough to rest. "Rex," Lily said softly, "you're my hero." The dog twitched his ears, lifted his head slightly, then rested again. For Lily, that gesture was enough. It said more than words ever could. Officer Moore visited occasionally, bringing updates about new procedures in the K-9 unit and checking on Lily's progress. Each visit reminded him of the responsibility he had once underestimated and the lives that could have been lost without careful observation. The memory of that night remained with him, a constant lesson in humility and the power of listening. Meanwhile, Judge Whitman documented the entire case, emphasizing lessons learned. His report recommended immediate revisions to K-9 deployment procedures, child safety protocols, and courtroom procedures for handling new evidence introduced in unconventional ways. The case became a teaching moment for other courts, law enforcement agencies, and communities nationwide. Months later, Briarwood held a small ceremony to honor Rex for his service. The event was modest but heartfelt. Community members gathered, smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes. Children petted Rex carefully, adults shook Officer Moore's hand, and Sarah held Lily in her arms as the little girl waved to the dog. Rex, stoic as ever, accepted the praise with calm dignity. For him, it wasn't about recognition. It had never been about recognition. It had always been about duty, loyalty, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Lily approached Rex slowly, clutching her rabbit. "Thank you," she said again, softly but sincerely. The dog nudged her hand gently with his nose. No words were needed. Lily hugged him lightly and Moore watched, feeling a quiet satisfaction that some stories, however small, ended in safety and trust. The prosecutor, reflecting privately on the case, admitted he had underestimated the importance of observation, instinct, and the voices of those who cannot speak fully for themselves. He vowed to advocate for policy reforms, ensuring that other children and other cases would never suffer the same oversight. Sarah finally exhaled, realizing how close they had come to tragedy and how far they had traveled toward resolution. Her small niece had experienced something no child should endure, yet she had survived, and with a dog like Rex beside her, she would always feel protected. At home, as evening fell, Sarah tucked Lily into bed. The little girl's eyes sparkled with tired but unwavering confidence. Her rabbit lay beside her, and Rex sat patiently just outside the door, his ears alert. "Good night, hero," Lily whispered, reaching out to pat Rex gently. The dog's tail wagged softly. Then finally he rested, satisfied that his job for now was complete. And in Briarwood, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But the lessons of that day lingered: the importance of vigilance, the power of instinct, and the profound truth that courage could come in any form, even a small child pointing toward a police dog in a courtroom. Years later, people would remember the story as more than just a case. They would remember it as a moment when a child's voice, a dog's instinct, and human accountability came together to reveal the truth. A story that reminded them all: sometimes the smallest beings carry the greatest courage, and sometimes heroes arrive on four legs with silent eyes and steady hearts. And as long as Rex remained by her side, Lily would always know she had been seen, protected, and valued.